My name is Elias Ward, the man said, and it was the first lie he'd told in 10 years. Abigail Turner didn't know she was staring at the richest man in 3 counties. She saw patched clothes, a worn leather bag, boots worn thin at the heel, and a stranger asking for work she could barely afford to pay. What she couldn't see was the fortune he'd buried behind a borrowed name, or the wound that made him bury it. He had come to answer one question, and he was willing to lie to answer it. Could a woman love the man before she ever found the money? Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel. Follow this story all the way to the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. He had rehearsed the name for 3 days on the road, whispering it to his horse, until it stopped feeling like a costume and started feeling like skin. Elias Ward. Elias Ward. By the time he walked the last mile up the rutted lane, leading a plain brown mare he'd bought from a stranger so no one would recognize the animal, he had almost convinced himself. The woman came out onto the porch with a rifle held low across her body. Not pointed at him, just present. The way a person holds a warning without raising their voice. "That's far enough," she called. He stopped where he was. He set his bag down in the dirt to show his hands were empty. "Didn't mean to startle you, ma'am." "You didn't." She came down 2 steps. She was maybe 30-31, with the kind of tired around her eyes that didn't come from one bad night. It came from 100 of them stacked one on top of the other. "Startling me would take more than a man on foot. What do you want?" "Work." "There's no work here." "There's a fence down on your east line," he said. "I walked past it. 3 posts rotted clean through, and your barn door's hanging on one hinge. I can hear it from here." She looked at him a long moment. "You always inventory a place before you ask to be hired." "I like to know what I'm offering to fix." Something in her face moved, not a smile, nothing so generous as that, but a small shift, like a woman recalculating a sum she'd already added up wrong. "I can't pay you," she said flatly. "Not the way a man deserves. I've got maybe a few dollars and a mortgage that eats the rest. So if you're looking to leave here richer, keep walking. There's bigger farms south of here." "I'm not looking to leave here richer." "Then what are you looking for?" He almost told her the truth then. It rose up in his throat, the whole tangled thing of it, and he swallowed it back down. "Honest work," he said. "A place to sleep. Food if you can spare it. Whatever wage you can manage, and no argument about the rest." She lowered the rifle the rest of the way. "You've got a strong back. I've got 2 hands and no complaints in me." "Everybody's got no complaints on the first day," she said. "Come back and tell me that after the harvest, if you last that long." Her name was Abigail Turner, and the farm had been her husband's before it was hers. She told him that much on the walk to the barn, not because she wanted to, he could tell, but because a man ought to know whose roof he was under and whose ghost he was living beside. "He passed 2 winters ago," she said. "So it's just me now, me and whatever help I can scrape together, which lately is nothing at all." "I'm sorry for your loss. People say that." She pushed the crooked barn door and it groaned on its one good hinge. "They say it like it's a coin they can hand you and be done. You don't have to say it. You didn't know him." "No, ma'am, but I know what it is to be the last one standing in a place that used to be full." She stopped, turned, looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time and not liking how easily he'd said something true. "The loft's up there," she said, pointing, changing the subject the way people do when a stranger gets too close too fast. "It's dry. There's a straw tick you can use. Supper's at dusk and you eat at the table with me, or you don't eat because I won't have a man taking his plate off to a corner like a dog. That clear? Clear." "Good." She turned to go, then stopped in the doorway. "What did you say your name was again?" And here was the moment. The whole lie held its breath. "Elias," he said. "Elias Ward." "Well, Elias Ward." She said it slow, testing it, and for one terrible second he was certain she could hear the false note in it, the way you can hear a cracked bell even when it's tolling true. "Don't disappoint me. I've been disappointed enough for one lifetime." She left him there in the dust and the horse smell, and Benjamin Whitmore, the wealthiest agricultural investor in 3 counties. The man whose signature moved more grain than most states saw in a year climbed a ladder into a hayloft and lay down on a straw tick and stared at the rafters and wondered what in God's name he thought he was doing. He knew what he was doing. That was the trouble. He knew exactly. For 10 years, the money had come first through every door before he did. Women had smiled at him across ballrooms with their fathers, standing 3 feet behind them like auctioneers. Men had clapped him on the back and called him brother, and then 6 months later called him a fool for not signing whatever they'd been maneuvering him toward the whole time. His own uncle had toasted his health at a dinner and sold him out to a competitor before the plates were cleared. He had grown so used to being wanted for what he had that he'd stopped believing anyone could want him for what he was. He had begun to wonder if there was even a what he was left underneath it all, or if the fortune had eaten the man years ago and left only a name in a checkbook. So he'd done a mad thing. He'd told his estate manager, a gray, careful man named Harmon, that he was going to disappear for 1 season. Disappear where? Harmon had asked. Into a life, Benjamin had said. One that doesn't know me. And do what, sir? Find out if there's a man in here worth a damn without the money doing his talking for him. Harmon had thought he'd lost his mind. Harmon had been right to think so, but Harmon had also known him since he was a boy, and so Harmon had said only, "How will I reach you?" "You won't, unless there's a fire, unless it's the kind of thing that can't wait. And if I need to reach you, then don't call me by my name," Benjamin had said. "Whatever you do, don't ever call me by my name where anyone can hear." He lay in the loft now and thought about that instruction and did not yet know it was the loose thread that would one day pull the whole thing apart. The first week nearly broke him, and he was glad of it. He'd forgotten what real work did to a body. His hands softened by years of signing papers. Other men's hands had made split and bled and scabbed over and split again. His shoulders seized up so tight the first 3 nights that he could hardly lift his arms to climb the ladder. He set fence posts until his palms were raw mended. The barn door patched the roof of the chicken house and hauled water until his spine felt like a rusted hinge, and he had never felt more like a human being in his life. "You're going to hurt yourself," Abigail told him on the 4th day, watching him try to lift a beam that 2 men should have carried. "I'm fine." "You're not fine, you're stubborn, and there's a difference." She grabbed the other end before he could argue, and they carried it together, and she matched him step for step, and didn't grunt once, and when they set it down, she wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him. Where'd a man learn to work like he's got something to prove? He almost laughed. "I've got plenty to prove." To who? To myself, mostly. She studied him. He was getting used to being studied by her. She had a way of looking at a person like she was reading the small print on a contract, like she'd been burned before by taking things at face value and had promised herself never again. "That's the only person worth proving anything to," she said finally. "Everybody else forgets, but you've got to live in your own skin every day." She walked off toward the house, and Benjamin stood there with his ruined hands and thought, "She has no idea what she just said to me." There was a table, and at that table he learned who Abigail Turner was. She insisted on it, the table. That first supper he'd hesitated at the doorway, and she'd pointed at a chair without looking up. "Sit." "I can take it outside if you'd rather." "I said sit, Elias." She set a plate in front of him. It wasn't much beans cornbread, a thin slice of salt pork, but it was hot, and it was set in front of him like it mattered that he ate it. "My mother fed every soul that came up this road when I was a girl. Tramps, drifters, men down on their luck. She said you can tell everything about a household by whether the hired hand eats at the table or on the step. I don't have much, but what I've got I share, and I share it sitting down. Now eat before it's cold." He ate. And across the table over the days that followed, the pieces of her came out. Not all at once. Never volunteered, but drawn out slow, the way water comes up from a deep well hand over hand. Her husband Samuel. How he'd built the barn with his own hands. How he'd died, and here her voice went flat and careful. The way people talk about the thing that ruined them defending the farm from a pair of men who'd come in the night to run off the stock. He'd taken a fall, hit his head, lingered 3 days, and then was gone. They never caught them, she said. The men who came. I used to lie awake thinking about that. Then I stopped because thinking about it didn't bring him back, and it didn't save the wheat, and one of those two things I could still do something about. She pushed her food around her plate. So I decided to be somebody who could still do something. It's the only thing that kept me from going under. That's a hard road to walk alone, he said. Everybody walks it alone, she said. Some of us just admit it. The thing about pretending to be poor, Benjamin discovered, was that you couldn't fix it with money. And that was the whole point, and it was killing him, because the farm was dying. He could see it in a way she maybe couldn't let herself. The horses were spent 2 old plow horses, with their ribs starting to show, worked past what any animal should be. The equipment was failing. The mortgage sat over the place like weather, and the harvest, if it came in strong, might buy her 1 more year. If it didn't, she was finished. And in his coat, buried under the false name and the patched clothes, was the power to erase every debt she had with the stroke of a pen and never miss the sum. He couldn't touch it. The moment he touched it, he'd have his answer to the wrong question. He'd know she was grateful. He'd never know if she loved him. He lay awake over it. He worked it like a knot he couldn't loosen. And the more he watched her, the straight set of her back, when the neighbor's boy rode up with the mortgage papers, the way she thanked God out loud before every thin meal. Like the food was a feast. The worse the knot got, because he was starting to want something from her that no amount of money had ever been able to buy him, and he was terrified that the wanting would ruin it. The neighbors came the 2nd week. That's when he saw what she was made of. A man named Prescott and 2 of his hands rode up the lane, big men on well-fed horses, the kind of prosperous that likes to spread itself out and be looked at. Prescott had his eye on Abigail's land. Half the county did, waiting for her to fold, and he'd come to check on the vulture's progress. "Ms. Turner," Prescott said, tipping his hat with the courtesy menus right before an insult. "Getting on all right? Heard you took on some help." He looked at Benjamin, the way you'd look at a mule you were thinking about buying and had decided against. "This him? Where'd you scrape this one up?" "Elias came to me looking for honest work," Abigail said, "and he's given it." "Given? Elias?" Prescott snorted. "Looks like something the road spit up. No offense, friend, but a man your age with nothing but the shirt on his back that tells a story, don't it? Either you can't hold work, or you can't be trusted to. Which is it?" Benjamin said nothing. He'd learned that in 10 years of boardrooms that the man who stays quiet keeps his ground. But he felt the old heat come up in him anyway, the muscle memory of a man used to men speaking to him, with their hats already off. Before he could decide whether to swallow it, Abigail stepped forward. "Mr. Prescott." Her voice could have cut glass. "That man has done more honest work on this farm in 11 days than you've done in your whole soft life. He set 9 fence posts yesterday. Can you tell me the last time your hands touched a post hole digger? Or do you just point at things and let other men bleed for you?" Prescott's face went red. "Now you listen." "I'm done listening." She wasn't loud. That was the frightening part. She didn't need to be. "You came up my lane to sniff at my failure. Well, take a good look, because it's the only look you'll get. My farm's not for sale. My hired man's not for mocking. And my patience is spent. Good day." Prescott's horse turned. The whole party turned. And they rode back down the lane, and Benjamin stood there beside her, undone. No one had ever defended him before. Not once. Not in his entire moneyed life. People deferred to him. That was different. That was fear wearing a smile. But no one had ever planted their feet in front of him and taken his side against another person, for nothing, expecting nothing back. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did." She was still watching the dust settle where they'd gone. A man's dignity isn't his to give away, and it sure isn't Prescott's to take. Doesn't matter what's in your pockets. Nobody talks to somebody under my roof like they're less than a person. She turned and looked at him, and some of the fire went out of her, and what was left underneath was almost gentle. You didn't answer him back. Wasn't worth the breath. No, she said slowly. It's more than that. You've got the look of a man who's used to being talked down to and decided a long time ago it wasn't worth fighting. Somebody hurt you like that once, made you small. She wasn't wrong, though she was wrong about how. Well, not here. You hear me? Not on this land. He had to turn away from her then. He had to, because his eyes had gone hot, and he'd be damned if he'd let her see it. This woman who had nothing standing over him like a shield. This woman who thought she was defending a poor drifter and had no idea she'd just done for the richest man in Kansas what all his money never could. Tell her something in him said. Tell her right now before it goes any further and the telling gets harder. But he didn't. God help him, he didn't. Because he wanted one more day of being just Elias. One more supper at the table. One more morning of her handing him a mug of chicory coffee and calling him by a name that had never bought or sold a thing. One more day. He kept telling himself just one more. She patched his coat on a Sunday. He'd torn it on the barbed wire, a long, ugly rip down the sleeve, and he'd meant to leave it. A farmhand doesn't fuss over a work coat. But he came in from evening chores, and it was gone from the peg where he'd hung it, and when he found it, it was in her lap, and she had a needle going through it slow and steady in the last of the light. You didn't have to do that, he said. He seemed to keep saying that to her. It'll fall apart if somebody doesn't. She didn't look up. Her stitches were small and even. My mother taught me. She said a mended thing lasts longer than a new one if the mending's done with care. Most people don't mend anymore. They just throw a thing out and buy the next one. She bit the thread. I never had the money for that. Turns out it made me better at loving things. You take better care of what you can't just replace. He sat down across from her. He didn't say anything for a while. He watched her hands. He thought about the closets full of coats he owned. Coats that cost more than this farm cleared in a good year. Coats he'd worn twice and forgotten. He thought about how not one of them had ever been touched by a hand that cared whether he was warm. He thought that this torn work coat mended by lamplight by a woman who owed him nothing was worth more than every stitch of clothing he'd ever bought. Abigail. Her name felt like a confession in his mouth. Why are you good to me? You don't know me. I walked up your lane with nothing. For all you knew, I could have been one of those men, the ones who came for your husband. Her hands went still. For a long moment she didn't answer, and when she did, her voice had dropped low down under the anger and the pride down to whatever was actually holding her up. Because I decided, she said, that I wasn't going to let them turn me into somebody who slams the door. That's what they wanted. Not just the stock. They wanted to make me hard. Make me somebody who looks at a stranger and sees a threat first and a person second. And if I let them do that, if I became that woman, then they didn't just take Samuel. They took me too. She held the coat up, checked the seam, laid it back down. So I keep the door open, even when it scares me. Especially when it scares me. Because the day I stop is the day they win, and they've won enough. She handed him the coat. Here, good as it's going to get. He took it. It was warm from her lap. And Benjamin Whitmore sat in a small farmhouse holding a mended coat, and understood with a clarity that frightened him that he had fallen in love with a woman who did not know his name, and that the not knowing was the very thing that had made it possible, and that when she found out, and she would find out, these things always came out. He was going to lose the only true thing he'd ever had. The letter came the next morning, and it changed the weather of everything. The mortgage was being sold. Not renewed. Not renegotiated. Sold, the whole note bought up by a private party, and the private party's name was on the paper, and Benjamin knew it the second he read it over her shoulder, because he'd sat across a table from the man twice and disliked him both times. Calvin Mercer. Who's Calvin Mercer? Abigail asked, reading it again, like the words might rearrange themselves into something better. I don't know. Benjamin lied and hated himself for it, but he did know. He knew exactly. Calvin Mercer had been quietly buying up distressed farm notes across 3 counties for 18 months, and the reason was one Benjamin had heard whispered in the kind of rooms Elias Ward would never be allowed into. Mercer wasn't after farms. He was after the water under them. There was talk of a railroad spur of land values about to triple, and Mercer meant to own the whole valley before the news broke, and pay pennies for it by squeezing families like Abigail until they cracked. He was going to take everything she had, and he was going to do it legally. And there was a man named Elias Ward standing in her kitchen who could stop it with a telegram and could not send that telegram without ceasing to exist. "It says he's calling the note," Abigail said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "Full payment. 90 days. She set the letter down on the table with a care that was worse than if she'd thrown it. "I can't pay that in 90 days. I can't pay 1/10 of it. The harvest won't cover it, not even a good one." She sat down slowly. She put her hands flat on the table like she needed something solid. "I'm going to lose it. I'm going to lose everything Samuel built. You don't know that yet. Don't." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked afraid. Not tired, not guarded, afraid all the way down. "Don't tell me it'll be all right. Don't do the thing everybody does. I've had 2 years of people telling me it'll be all right and then watching them do nothing. I'd rather you were honest with me." Honest? The word landed in him like a blade. He stood there in her kitchen, with the whole truth burning a hole in his chest. "I'm Benjamin Whitmore. I have more money than Mercer will ever see. I can pay this note before lunch and never feel it marry me, and I'll burn that letter in front of you." And he could not say a single word of it, because if he said it now in this kitchen on this morning of her fear, he'd never know what her heart did on its own. He'd have bought her the way Mercer bought her note, and then he'd be no better than any of them. "All right," he said finally, and his voice came out rough. "Here's honest. I don't know if it'll be all right, but I know you're not alone in it. Whatever comes, you're not facing it by yourself. That's the only thing I can promise you, and mean it all the way down. You're not alone." She looked at him for a long, long moment. "Why do you say things like that?" she whispered. "Like you mean them more than a hired man ought to." And there it was again, the door. Wide open. "Tell her. Tell her now." His mouth opened. Outside, faint and getting closer, came the sound of wheels on the lane. Not a farm wagon. He knew that sound too well, the particular smooth roll of a fine carriage on good springs, the kind of vehicle that had no business on a dirt road 20 miles from town. The kind of carriage that only one sort of man rode in. Benjamin's blood went cold. Abigail turned toward the window. "Now who on earth—" He couldn't move. He stood rooted in her kitchen with his mouth still half open on a confession he'd waited too long to make, and the wheels came on, and the wheels came on. And somewhere in the pit of him, he already knew. Whatever was in that carriage had come for Elias Ward, and it was going to leave with him. The carriage stopped at the foot of the lane, and a young man in a clean traveling coat swung down before the wheels had fully settled. "Whoa, there!" he called to the horses, and then he turned toward the house, and Benjamin's heart dropped straight through the floor. He knew the face. It was one of Harmon's junior clerks, a boy named Tillman, eager and green and utterly incapable of understanding what he was about to walk into. He was already trotting up the lane with a leather portfolio clutched to his chest, and he was already looking for the one face he'd been sent to find. "Stay here," Benjamin said to Abigail, and he was out the door before she could ask why. "Elias." He didn't stop. He crossed the yard fast, meaning to head the boy off, meaning to get him back down the lane and out of sight before a single word could be spoken. He got within 10 feet. "There you are," Tillman said, relief flooding his young face. "Sir, I've been 3 days looking. Harmon sent me the moment the papers came through. He said it couldn't wait. He said you'd want to know before Mercer." "Not here," Benjamin said low and hard. "Walk with me, down the lane, now." But it was already too late, and some part of him had known it would be too late the moment he heard those wheels. Because Tillman, confused, glancing past him toward the house where Abigail had come out onto the porch, said the thing he'd been sent all this way to say. He said it plain, the way you say a name, you've been told belongs to the most important man you'll ever work for. Mr. Whitmore, please, it's urgent. The word landed in the yard like a struck bell. Whitmore. Benjamin closed his eyes. Behind him on the porch, he heard nothing at all. No gasp, no question. Just a silence, and the silence was worse than any sound she could have made, because he knew exactly what was happening inside it. He could feel it happening. He could feel the whole thing he'd built coming apart behind his back, board by board, the way her farm had come apart, the way everything true came apart the moment it touched money. He turned around slowly. Abigail stood on the porch with one hand still on the door. She wasn't looking at Tillman. She wasn't looking at the fine carriage or the fine horses or the leather portfolio. She was looking at Benjamin, and her face was doing something terrible. It was rearranging itself, feature by feature, from the woman who'd mended his coat by lamplight into someone he'd never seen before. Someone who had just understood. "Whitmore," she said. Her voice came out strange and flat. "He called you Whitmore." "Abigail. Benjamin Whitmore." She said the full name like she was reading it off that mortgage letter, like she was reading it off a stone. I know that name. Everybody knows that name. That's the—" She stopped. Her hand came off the door and pressed flat against her own chest like something had struck her there. "That's the richest man in 3 counties. That's the man they say owns half the grain that leaves this state." Tillman, sensing at last that something had gone very wrong, looked from one of them to the other and shrank into his coat. "Sir, I go back to the carriage," Benjamin said without turning. "Wait for me there." The boy went. And then it was just the two of them 20 feet apart across a yard that had felt like the safest place in the world an hour ago. And Benjamin watched the woman he loved look at him like he was a stranger who'd broken into her house and worn her trust like a stolen coat. "Say it isn't true," she said. "It wasn't a plea. It was a test, and they both knew he was about to fail it. Tell me that boy's mistaken. Tell me you're Elias Ward and you set my fence posts and you slept in my loft and you're a poor man looking for honest work same as you told me. Tell me, Benjamin." He couldn't lie to her, not anymore. Whatever else he'd done, he wouldn't do that. "It's true," he said quietly. "My name is Benjamin Whitmore." She flinched like he'd hit her. "Get off my porch," she said. "Abigail, please let me get off my porch." Her voice cracked down the middle, and she let it. She didn't care anymore, and she came down the steps toward him with 2 years of held-together grief breaking loose all at once. "You lied to me. You stood in my kitchen and you ate my food and you let me. I defended you. Do you understand that? To Prescott. I stood in this yard, and I made a fool of myself defending a poor drifter's dignity. And the whole time you were richer than every man who ever sneered at me put together. You let me pity you. You let me feel sorry for you. I never wanted your pity." "Then what did you want?" She stopped a few feet away, close enough now that he could see her eyes were dry, and the dryness was worse than tears. "What could a man like you possibly want from a place like this? From a woman like me, I've got nothing. I've got a dying farm and a dead husband, and 90 days before I lose it all. What game were you playing, Benjamin Whitmore? What sport was I? You weren't sport." The words tore out of him. "You were never sport. Abigail, everything I felt at that table was real. Every word, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't you dare tell me what was real. You don't get to decide that anymore. You gave up the right to tell me what's real the day you walked up my lane with a name that wasn't yours." She was right. God help him, she was right, and he had no defense. And so he did the only honest thing left to him. He stood there and took it. "I know," he said. That stopped her. She'd braced for an argument. She'd braced for a rich man's excuses, the smooth talk, the reasons. She hadn't braced for surrender. "I know," he said again. "You're right. All of it. I lied to you, and there's no way to make it into something it wasn't. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was harmless because it wasn't. It cost you something. It cost you the truth, and you'd earned the truth, and I kept it from you anyway." He swallowed. "So I'm not going to argue. Just before I go, I need you to hear one thing, and then I'll leave, and I won't come back unless you ask me to." There's nothing you can say. Maybe not. But I'm going to say it anyway, and you can throw it out after that's your right." He took a breath, and the whole confession he'd been carrying for 11 days finally came loose. "I hid my name because for 10 years, every single person who ever got close to me got close to the money first. Women, business partners, my own family. I got so I couldn't tell the difference anymore between somebody who wanted me and somebody who wanted what I could give them. I stopped believing there was a difference. I thought maybe the man was just gone, that the money had eaten him, and there was nothing left underneath worth a damn." Her jaw was tight, but she was listening. He pressed on before she could stop him. "So I did a mad selfish thing. I put on another man's name, and I came out here to find out if anybody could, if there was still a person in here somebody could care about before they knew. And then I found you. And Abigail, you didn't just care about a poor man. You defended him. You mended his coat. You fed him at your own table when you had barely enough for yourself. And I got to see for the first time in 10 years what it looked like when somebody was good to me for no reason at all, except that it was in them to be good." His voice broke. "You gave me back something I thought was dead. And I was a coward because every day I meant to tell you, and every day I was too afraid that the moment you knew I'd lose exactly what I'd finally found. And now I've lost it anyway, and I lost it the worst way, and it's my own fault, and you don't owe me one thing. Not forgiveness. Not another word. Nothing." The yard went quiet. For one suspended moment, he thought he let himself hope that something in her had bent. Her chin had come up. Her eyes had softened at the edges just slightly, the way ice softens at the very first warm breath before it decides whether to melt or hold. And then it hardened again, and he watched the door close in her face from the inside. "You want to know the worst part?" she said, and now her voice was quiet, too quiet and terrible. "It's not that you're rich. I could forgive a man for being rich. It's not even that you lied about your name." She wrapped her arms around herself. "It's that you let me believe you needed saving. Every day. You let me worry about whether you had enough to eat. You let me fret over your torn coat and your worn boots and whether the work was too hard on you. I gave you my care, Benjamin. The realest thing I had left to give anybody. And you didn't need a bit of it. You had a mansion. You had more money than I'll see in 10 lifetimes. You took my care like it cost me nothing when it cost me everything because it's about all I had left." That one went in deeper than any of the others because it was the truest thing she'd said, and there was no answer to it. There was no answer to it at all. "I'm sorry," he said. It was pitifully small. It was all he had. "I know you are." She turned toward the house. "That's the thing that'll keep me up. I believe you're sorry. I even believe you meant the rest of it. But sorry doesn't put back what you took, and meaning it doesn't make me able to trust a word out of your mouth ever again. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get in your fine carriage, and you're going to go back to your fine life, and you're going to leave me to lose my farm in peace. Because I'd rather lose it honest than have you save it. Do you understand me? I would rather lose everything I have than take $1 from a man who lied to my face for 11 days. Abigail, get in the carriage, Benjamin." He stood there a moment longer. Everything in him strained toward her, toward saying the one right thing that would undo it. And there was no one right thing. There was nothing. There was only a woman with her back to him and a lie he could never take back. So he did the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. Harder than any deal, any loss, any funeral. He obeyed her. He walked down the lane. He got into the carriage. And for the first time in his adult life, Benjamin Whitmore walked away from something he wanted, not because the deal had gone bad, but because the person he'd hurt had asked him to. "Sir," Tillman said uncertainly as Benjamin pulled the door shut. Where are we going?" "Anywhere," Benjamin said, staring out the window at the farmhouse getting smaller. "Just drive." She held herself together until the carriage was out of sight. Then Abigail Turner walked back into her kitchen, and she saw his coffee mug still sitting on the table where he'd left it, and she saw the mended coat folded over the back of his chair, and something in her chest that she'd been holding shut by main force for 11 days. No, for 2 whole years, finally gave way. Finally gave. She sat down hard in the chair. Not his chair. Her own. And she put her face in her hands, and she did not cry, because she'd gotten so good at not crying that she'd half forgotten how. But she shook all through her, like a house in a wind that won't let up. She was angry. That was the top layer, the loud one, and she let herself stay there because it was safer than what was underneath. She was angry at his lie, at his money, at his cowardice, at the 11 days of care she'd poured into a man who hadn't needed a single drop of it. But underneath the anger in the quiet place she didn't want to look at was something that scared her far worse. Because the truth, the real truth, the one she'd never say out loud, was that she'd started to feel something for Elias Ward. For the man who worked beside her sunup to sundown and never complained. For the man who'd sat across her table and said, "I know what it is to be the last one standing in a place that used to be full," and meant it. She'd swear he'd meant it. For the man who'd asked her in the lamplight why she was good to him, like nobody had ever been good to him before, and he couldn't understand it. And here was the thing that broke her worst of all, the thought she chased around and around the kitchen for the rest of that day and could not escape. What if that man had been real? Because Benjamin's story, damn him, had the ring of truth to it. She'd heard 100 lies in 2 years. Every man who'd come to buy her out had lied smooth and easy. This hadn't sounded like that. When he'd said, "You gave me back something I thought was dead," his voice had done the thing a voice does when it's telling the truth in spite of itself. She knew that sound. She'd heard it in her own throat once, which meant the man she'd started to care for might have been real the whole time. The care in his eyes at the table, real. The way he'd taken it from Prescott without a word rather than shame her by fighting, real. The trueness she'd felt sitting across from him, real. And that was so much worse than if it had all been a con. If it had all been a lie, she could hate him clean, hate him whole, and be done. But she couldn't. Because the man was real, and the name was false, and she didn't know how to hold both of those things in the same 2 hands without one of them breaking her. "Damn you, Benjamin Whitmore," she said to the empty kitchen. "Damn you for being real." She got up. She took the mended coat off the back of the chair. She meant to burn it. She really did. She carried it all the way to the stove, and then she stood there holding it. And she couldn't. She couldn't put it in the fire. She folded it instead, small and tight, and she put it away in the bottom of a trunk where she wouldn't have to look at it, and she told herself that was the same as being done with him. It wasn't. She knew it wasn't. But she told herself anyway because a person has to tell themselves something to get through a night like the one coming. Benjamin did not go back to the mansion. Tillman drove him to town to the only respectable hotel in 20 miles, and Benjamin took a room and sat in it and did not sleep. The room had a real bed and clean sheets and a washstand with hot water, and after 11 days in a hayloft, it should have felt like heaven, and it felt like a cell. He kept reaching for the wrong things. He'd wake in the night, reaching for the ladder, for the smell of hay, for the sound of Abigail moving around the kitchen before dawn. He'd reach and find a hotel wall, and the loss would come fresh all over again. On the second day, Harmon came. The old estate manager arrived by the afternoon train, gray and careful as ever, and he found Benjamin sitting by the window in yesterday's clothes, with a bottle he hadn't touched. "Tillman told me," Harmon said, setting his hat on the table. "He's beside himself, the boy. Thinks he's ruined you. I told him a clerk can't ruin a Whitmore, but he's young. He'll learn. It wasn't his fault." Benjamin didn't look away from the window. "It was mine, all of it. He just said my name. I'm the one who spent 11 days making that name into a bomb." Harmon studied him. In 40 years of service, he had seen Benjamin's father buried, seen fortunes made and threatened and saved, seen the boy grow into the man. He had never once seen this. "You care for her," Harmon said. "It wasn't a question. It doesn't matter what I feel. She told me to go and she was right to. I lied to her, Harmon, for 11 days. She defended me to her neighbors, she mended my clothes, she shared food she couldn't spare, and the whole time I was letting her think I was a poor man who needed her charity. There's no coming back from a thing like that. I wouldn't come back from it if I were her." Harmon was quiet a moment. Then he said the thing he'd come to say, and it was not comfort. Mercer's calling her note. Benjamin's head came up. I know, he said. I saw the letter. 90 days. She can't pay it. The harvest won't cover a fraction. His jaw tightened. That's why Tillman came, wasn't it? That's the thing that couldn't wait. It gets worse than you know. Harmon sat down across from him, folding his hands. I've been looking into Mercer since his name started coming up on these notes. It's not just her farm, Benjamin. He's bought up a dozen distressed notes across 3 counties in the last year and a half. Always the same story, a family that's struggling a note nobody else wants. And Mercer swoops in and buys the paper, and then calls it due on a timeline nobody could ever meet. He's not collecting debts. He's engineering foreclosures. And I think... Harmon paused. I think some of these families weren't as far gone as their papers made them look. I think somebody's been cooking the accounts, making solvent farms look like sinking ones so Mercer can buy the notes cheap and then squeeze. Benjamin was very still now. The grief was still there, but under it something else had woken the old sharp thing the businessman's mind that could smell a fraud from a county away. The water, he said slowly. It's about the water. The railroad spur. You've heard. I've heard rumors. Nothing solid. Benjamin stood, and for the first time in 2 days, there was something in his movement besides defeat. If a spur goes through that valley, every acre triples. Mercer's not buying farms. He's buying the whole valley for pennies before the news breaks, and he's using foreclosure to do it, and he's crushing a dozen families to make himself a king. He turned to Harmon. Including Abigail. Including Abigail. And here was the terrible arithmetic of it, and Benjamin saw the whole thing laid out plain. He could pay her note. He could pay it this afternoon, wire the money, buy out Mercer's paper, hand her the deed free and clear. It would take him minutes. It would cost him nothing. And he could never do it. Not now. Because she'd told him, in her own yard with her own voice, that she would rather lose everything than take $1 from him. If he paid her note, he wouldn't be saving her. He'd be proving her right about him, that money was the only tool he had, that he'd solve her the way he solved everything, by writing a check and expecting gratitude. He'd be doing to her exactly what Mercer was doing, just with kindness instead of cruelty. He'd be buying her. I can't pay it, Benjamin said, and the words cost him. Harmon frowned. You can pay it 100 times over. I have the money to pay it. I don't have the right to pay it. She told me she'd rather lose the farm than take my help. If I go behind her back and buy that note, I'm not respecting her. I'm overriding her. I'm treating her like a problem my money can fix, and that's the exact thing that broke her heart in the first place. He shook his head. No, there's only one way I'm allowed to help her, and it's the hard way. The way that gives me no credit and asks her for nothing. And what way is that? Benjamin looked at his old friend, and there was a light in his eyes now that Harmon hadn't seen in years, not the hunger for a deal, something cleaner than that. I'm going to take down Calvin Mercer, Benjamin said. Not for her, not so she'll forgive me, she won't, and I'm not doing it to earn that. I'm going to do it because there are a dozen families about to lose everything to a fraud, and I'm one of maybe 3 men in this state with the reach to stop it. And if it happens to save her farm along the way, then it saves her farm. But she'll never know I had a hand in it. That's the condition. She can never know. Because the moment she knows I've made it about me again, and I've promised myself I'm done making it about me. Harmon was quiet a long moment. Then slowly the old man smiled the first real smile in that grim little room. You've changed, he said. No. Benjamin picked up his hat. I think maybe I've finally stopped being changed. By the money. By everybody who wanted it. For 11 days out on that farm, I got to find out who I am when nobody's after my fortune. His voice roughened. Turns out he's not nothing after all. Turns out there was a man under there the whole time. She found him. She just doesn't know she did. He walked to the door. Where are you going? Harmon asked. To work, Benjamin said. Get me everything you have on Mercer. Every note, every family, every account he's touched. And get it quiet. If he catches wind that a Whitmore's looking at him, he'll cover his tracks and vanish, and a dozen families go down with him. He set his hat on his head. And for the first time since the carriage had pulled away from that farmhouse, he looked like a man with a purpose instead of a wound. "We've got 90 days. Less. Let's not waste them grieving." Chapter 10. Out on the farm, Abigail was not grieving either. She'd decided she didn't have time for it. She got up before dawn the morning after he left, same as always. And she did the chores, same as always. And she told herself that a man walking out of her life was no different than weather passing through. You didn't mourn a storm, you just cleaned up after it and got back to work. She almost believed it. She was good at almost believing things. It was how she'd survived, but the farm had gotten harder in a single day, and she couldn't pretend that away. 11 days she'd had a second pair of hands. Strong ones, hands that never quit, and she'd let herself get used to it faster than she'd realized. Now they were gone, and the work that had been just barely possible with 2 people was flatly impossible with 1. And the harvest was coming, and the note was coming, and the arithmetic didn't work no matter how many times she ran it. She ran it anyway. She sat at the table that night with a stub of pencil and the mortgage letter and a scrap of paper, and she added up everything she had against everything she owed, and the numbers came out the same way they'd come out every night for 2 years, which was hopeless. 90 days. Full payment. There was no version of the arithmetic where she kept the farm. She set the pencil down. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself think about the carriage. About the man who could have made all of it disappear with a word, who had offered to make it disappear, and whom she had sent away. She thought about how easy it would have been, how warm. She thought about a life where she never sat at this table doing this arithmetic again. And then she pushed the thought away hard, because that easy warmth was exactly the trap, wasn't it? That was how they got you. First, they made you comfortable, and then they owned you. Prescott would own her if she sold to him. Mercer would own her through the note. And Benjamin would own her too, in the gentlest way of all, through gratitude, through a debt she could never repay. And she'd spend the rest of her life beholden to the man who'd lied to her face. No, better to lose it clean. Better to lose it honest, she said out loud, testing the words, and they sounded brave, and she almost believed them. Almost. She went to bed, and lay awake, and stared at the dark, and against her own will, against every wall she'd built, one image kept coming back to her, and would not leave. Not the carriage, not the fine name, not the fortune. Just a man in a torn coat sitting across her table in the lamplight, asking her quietly why she was good to him, like he'd never in his whole life been shown a kindness that didn't come with a price. And Abigail Turner, lying alone in the dark in a house she was about to lose, pressed her hands over her eyes, and wondered for the first time whether she had been too quick to close the door, and hated herself for wondering it, and did not sleep at all. She did not sleep, and the not sleeping made her sharp, and the sharpness saved her farm. Because at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, Abigail did the arithmetic one more time, and this time she wasn't running the numbers she owed. She was running the numbers she had. And something snagged. She got up. She lit the lamp. She dug through the trunk, past the mended coat. She didn't let herself linger on the mended coat down to the bottom where Samuel had kept the farm's papers in an oilcloth bundle. She hadn't opened it since the winter he died. She hadn't been able to. She opened it now, and there among the deeds and the old receipts, she found the original mortgage. Samuel's mortgage. The one he'd signed with the county bank 8 years ago, back when the world was whole. She read it by lamplight slow, and then she read it again, and her hands started to shake, and this time it wasn't grief. Because the note Mercer had bought, the note that said she owed full payment in 90 days, didn't match. The numbers didn't match. The original note Samuel signed had been for less. Considerably less. And there was a clause plain as day, in Samuel's careful bank's plain language, that said the note could only be called due in full upon default. And default meant 3 consecutive missed payments, and Abigail had never in 2 years missed a single one. She'd starved herself thin making those payments. She had the receipts. She had every one of them dated and stamped right there in the oilcloth bundle. Mercer's paper was a lie. Someone had rewritten the note. Someone had taken Samuel's honest mortgage and forged a new one on top of it, inflated the sum, and slipped in a called due clause that never existed in the original. And they'd counted on a grieving widow 20 miles from town being too broken and too ignorant to ever check the paper against the deed. They'd counted wrong. "You made a mistake," Abigail whispered to the dark to Mercer, to whoever had done this. "You picked the wrong widow." She didn't sleep the rest of that night either. But now it was a different kind of not sleeping. Now she had something in her hands that felt like a weapon. 40 miles away, in a rented office over the town's only law firm, Benjamin was arriving at the same weapon from the other end. Harmon had done his work. For 6 days, the two of them, plus a discreet young lawyer named Chase, whom Benjamin trusted and paid well for both his skill and his silence, had pulled apart Calvin Mercer's dealings thread by thread. And what they found made even Benjamin, who had seen men do ugly things for money, go cold. "It's the same scheme every time," Chase said, spreading the papers across the table. 12 families, 12 notes, and in at least 9 of them, the note Mercer's holding doesn't match the original mortgage on file at the county. The sums are inflated. The default clauses are forged. He's rewriting the paper, Mr. Whitmore. He's manufacturing debt that was never owed and then foreclosing on it. "How's he getting away with it?" Benjamin asked. "Somebody at the county has to record these. Somebody would notice the discrepancy." Chase and Harmon exchanged a look. "That's the part you're not going to like," Harmon said. "There's a man at the county recorder's office," Chase said. "Deputy recorder, fellow named Pruitt. He certifies the notes, and every single one of Mercer's forged notes went through Pruitt's desk and came out stamped legal." He tapped the papers. "Mercer's not working alone. He's got the county in his pocket, which means the fraud looks legal all the way down. A family goes to court to fight the foreclosure, and there's Pruitt on the stand swearing the paper's genuine with the county seal to back him. Who's a judge going to believe a certified county officer or a bankrupt farmer with a wild story about forged notes?" Benjamin sat down slowly. The scope of it was sinking in. This wasn't one greedy man. This was a machine. Mercer had built a machine for turning honest families out of their homes, and he'd oiled it with a corrupt official, and it ran smooth, and it ran legal, and there was no obvious way to stop it, because the people it crushed were exactly the people no one would believe. "He picks them careful," Harmon said quietly. "Have you noticed the families? Widows, old couples, folks with no money for a good lawyer, no connections, nobody in town who'd go to bat for them. He picks the ones who can't fight back." "Like a widow 20 miles out," Benjamin said. His jaw was tight. "With a dead husband and a dying wheat crop, and nobody in the world to stand up for her. Nobody except a man she'd thrown off her porch." "There's more," Chase said, and now his voice dropped. "I've been asking around careful as I could. And Mercer knows somebody's looking. He doesn't know it's you. We've kept your name 100 miles from this, but he's spooked. He's moving up his timeline. 3 of the foreclosures were supposed to happen in the fall. He's pulled them forward. He wants these families off the land and the deeds in his hand before whoever's asking questions can get anywhere." "How far forward?" Chase looked at him. "The widow Turner's the first," he said. "He's calling her note in 9 days. Not 90, 9. He's found some technicality to accelerate it, and I'd bet my license the technicality's as forged as the rest. She'll get the notice any day now. And when she can't pay in 9 days, which she can't, he takes the farm, and the machine's got its first deed of the season, and every other family in line sees what happens to the ones who can't pay, and they fold without a fight." Benjamin was on his feet before Chase finished. 9 days, he said. 9 days. And there it was. The trap sprung, the vice closing, and Benjamin standing on the outside of it with all the money in the world, and a promise he'd made himself that he couldn't touch her farm with a single dollar of it. Because the moment he paid that note, he proved her right about him, and worse, he tipped Mercer that a rich man was in the game, and Mercer covered his tracks and the other 11 families went down anyway. He couldn't buy her out. He had to break the machine, and he had 9 days to do it. "Chase," he said, "the forged notes, can we prove they're forged? If we could put the original mortgages next to Mercer's notes in front of an honest judge, yes. The discrepancies are plain. But we can't get the originals. They're in the county recorder's office, and the county recorder's office is Pruitt, and Pruitt is Mercer's man. He'll never release them. He'll swear they don't exist. He might have destroyed them already. Then we need a family who kept their own copy, Harmon said. The original mortgage signed at the bank held at home. 9 of these families are gone or too scared to fight. Do we have even one who'd stand up, who kept their papers? And the room went quiet because they all knew the answer was probably no. These were exactly the families who didn't keep careful papers, who trusted the bank and the county to hold the records, who'd handed over their trust the way honest people do, and gotten it turned into a weapon against them. I'll keep looking, Chase said, but his voice said he didn't have much hope. Benjamin walked to the window. 9 days. A corrupt official. A machine built to crush exactly the people who couldn't fight. And the one person in the whole scheme he most wanted to save was the one person he'd sworn never to approach again. Just lose it honest, she'd said. She'd rather lose the farm than take his help. But she didn't know it was a fraud. She thought she genuinely owed the money. She was preparing to give up her home to a debt she didn't even owe, and she'd never know because she'd sent away the one man with the reach to prove it. I have to tell her, Benjamin said quietly. Harmon frowned. Tell her what? That the note's a forgery. That she doesn't owe what they say she owes. That she can fight this. He turned from the window. She has receipts, Harmon. She's the kind of woman who keeps receipts. I'd stake my life on it. If she's got proof she never missed a payment, and if she's got Samuel's original mortgage in a drawer somewhere, she's the family we've been looking for. She's the one who can bring the whole machine down. You swore you wouldn't go near her again. I swore I wouldn't try to buy her. I swore I wouldn't use my money to override her. Benjamin's voice was steady now, sure in a way it hadn't been in days. This is different. This isn't a check. This is the truth, and she's earned the truth more than anybody alive, and I've kept enough truth from her to last 2 lifetimes. He reached for his hat. I'm not going to save her, Harmon. I couldn't if I tried, she won't let me. But I can hand her the weapon and let her save herself. And if she throws me off the porch again, then at least she'll be throwing me off with the truth in her hands instead of a lie. Disho. She was in the field when the carriage came the second time, and she saw it from a long way off, and everything in her went hard. She knew that carriage. She'd know it in her sleep now. And she stood in her half-cut wheat with the scythe in her hands, and watched it come up the lane, and she told herself she would not soften. She would not listen. She would send him off the same as before, and this time she wouldn't lie awake after. He got down. He did not come up the lane. He stopped at the edge of the field at the fence line. The fence line he'd mended she noticed and hated that she noticed, and he took off his hat, and he waited, hands at his sides, for her to decide whether to come to him. She made him wait a long time. She finished the row. Then she walked over, slow scythe still in her hand, and she stopped on her side of the fence with the posts between them, like a wall she was glad to have. You've got some nerve, she said. I know. I told you not to come back. You told me not to come back unless you asked, and you didn't ask, so you're right. I've got no business here. He turned the hat in his hands. I'm going to say one thing, and if you tell me to go after I've said it, I'll go, and this time I won't come back at all, asked or not. I swear it. You've sworn things before. That landed. She saw it land. He didn't flinch away from it. I have, he said. And I've earned every bit of that. So don't take my word. Take the paper. He held out a folded document across the fence. Your mortgage note. The one Mercer's holding. I've had it looked at by a lawyer, and I'm telling you as plain as I know how it's a forgery, Abigail. The sum's inflated. The clause that lets him call it due doesn't exist in the real note. You don't owe what they say you owe. And you're not the only one. He's done it to a dozen families. It's a fraud, and it's run through a crooked man at the county, and it's built to crush exactly the kind of people who can't fight back. She didn't take the paper. She stood there very still, and her face didn't change, and for a moment he thought she might not have heard him, or might not care. Then she said in a strange, flat voice, How much is the real note for? He told her the sum. Samuel's original figure. The true one. And Abigail Turner went white because it was the exact number she'd found at 3 in the morning in the bottom of the oilcloth bundle. The number Mercer's paper didn't match. The number she'd told no living soul. "You already knew," Benjamin said, watching her face. "You found it yourself. 6 nights ago." Her voice was barely there. "I found Samuel's mortgage. The real one. The numbers didn't match Mercer's. I thought I was going crazy. I thought maybe I'd misremembered or Samuel had signed something later I didn't know about." She looked at him, and for the first time since the day of the carriage, she wasn't looking at him like a liar. She was looking at him like a person who'd just confirmed she wasn't losing her mind. "You're telling me I was right. You were right. And you're not alone in it, and it's not a mistake. It's a scheme, and it has a name, and the name is Calvin Mercer, and he's coming for your farm in 9 days. 90, she said automatically. The letter said 90. He's moved it up. Benjamin's voice was gentle, but he didn't soften the fact. Somebody's asking questions he doesn't like, and it's spooked him, and he's rushing all the foreclosures forward. Yours is first. 9 days, Abigail. You'll get the notice any time now. He's counting on you not being able to pay in 9 days, and he's counting on you not knowing the note's a fraud, and he's counting on nobody in the world standing up for a widow 20 miles from town. The scythe lowered in her hands. She looked down at the paper he was still holding out, and slowly she took it. She unfolded it. She read it. And he watched her read her own mortgage note. The way he'd read it, watched her find the inflated sum, the forged clause, the whole ugly lie of it. And watched her face go from white to something else, something with iron in it. 9 days, she said. 9 days. And this crooked man at the county, he'll swear the note's real. He's sworn it real for 9 other families. He's got the county seal to back him. That's why it works. A judge sees a certified county officer against a bankrupt widow with a wild story, and the judge believes the officer every time. Benjamin paused. Unless the widow's got proof, the original mortgage, and receipts for every payment she ever made to prove she never defaulted the way the note claims. Abigail's chin came up. I've got every receipt, she said slowly. 2 years of them, dated, stamped, every single payment I ever made, and I never missed one. I starved before I missed one. Her eyes came up to his, and there was a light in them now, fierce and cold. And I've got Samuel's real mortgage sitting in a trunk not 30 feet from here. The words hung in the air between them, and Benjamin understood in that moment exactly what he'd found. Not just a woman he loved, not just a widow being wronged. He'd found the one family in 12 who'd kept her papers, the one witness who could put the forged note next to the real one in front of a judge and blow Calvin Mercer's whole machine to pieces. The families who were gone couldn't fight. The families who were scared wouldn't fight. But Abigail Turner had the proof, and she had the spine, and she had a reason. She was the crack in the machine. She'd been it all along. Abigail. He chose his words carefully because everything turned on the next minute. I'm not here to save you. I want to be plain about that because I know how you feel about my money, and you're right to feel it. I couldn't save you if I wanted to. You won't let me, and you shouldn't. But you can save yourself. And if you save yourself, you save the other 11 families too, because once one person proves the fraud in open court, the whole thing comes down. You're not just fighting for your farm anymore. You're fighting for all of them. The old couple 2 counties over. The widow with the 3 children. Every family this man's put out in the cold, or is about to. He held her eyes. But you can't do it in 9 days alone 20 miles from town with a harvest to bring in. You need a lawyer who knows the law. You need somebody who can get this in front of an honest judge before Mercer's man can bury it. And I have those men. Not to help you. To help all of you. I'll pay for the lawyer, and you'll never owe me a cent, not to me, to the families, call it that. But I need you to say yes to letting me put a lawyer at your side. Just that. Nothing else. No money to you, no note bought, no debt to me. Just let me hand you the tools, and then get out of your way. She stared at him for a long, long moment. And he could see the war in her. He could see her pride wanting to say no, wanting to send him off, wanting to lose it honest, the way she'd sworn. And he could see the other thing. The mother who'd fed every drifter on the road. The woman who kept the door open even when it scared her. The person who had just been handed a chance to save not only her own home, but 11 other families from a man who preyed on the helpless. The scythe came all the way down. She set it against the fence. "I don't forgive you," she said. "I want that understood. This isn't forgiveness. You lied to me for 11 days, and that's not undone by you coming here with a paper no matter how good the paper is. I understand. This is about the note, and the families, and that man thinking he can pick on widows because widows can't fight back." Her voice hardened into something he'd never heard from her, something forged in the last 2 years of loss. "I buried a husband who died protecting this land from men who thought they could take what they wanted in the night. I am not going to hand it over in the daylight to a man in a suit with a forged piece of paper. Not while I've got breath and receipts." "So that's a yes to the lawyer." She jabbed a finger at him across the fence. "And only the lawyer. You don't set foot in my house. You don't pay my note. You don't fix my problems with your money behind my back. If I catch you doing one thing to save me that I didn't agree to, I'll throw the whole lot of you off this land and take my chances alone. Are we clear, Benjamin Whitmore?" "We're clear." And God help him, he almost smiled, because there she was, the woman who'd faced down Prescott, the woman who mended things instead of throwing them out, the woman who kept the door open even when it scared her, standing in her own field with iron in her spine and a forged note in her fist, choosing to fight. "Clear as I've ever been. Good." She picked the scythe back up. "Now get your lawyer out here tomorrow. We've got 9 days and a harvest to bring in, and I don't have time to stand at a fence arguing with a liar." She turned back to her wheat, then stopped, and without looking at him, she said one more thing quiet, almost against her will. "The note. Bringing it. Telling me the truth about it." A pause. "That was the right thing to do. I'm not saying more than that. But it was. It was the closest thing to a kind word she'd given him since the carriage, and it went through him like sunlight. Abigail. He had to say it. Whatever happens with the farm, whatever happens between us, which I know is nothing, I've made my peace with that. I need you to know one thing's true, the truest thing I've got. The man who mended your fences was real. The money doesn't change that. It never did." She didn't turn around, but her hands went still on the scythe for just a moment. "Get your lawyer," she said, "tomorrow, sunup." And she went back to cutting her wheat, and Benjamin put his hat on and walked back to the carriage, and for the first time in his life, he understood that the most powerful thing he owned wasn't the fortune at all. It was the truth. And he'd finally put it in the hands of the one person who could do something with it, not to win her back. Not to buy his way out of what he'd done, but because it was hers, and she'd earned it. And a man who'd learned anything at all out on that farm had learned that you give a person what they've earned, and you let them decide what to do with it. 9 days, a forged note, a crooked county man and a corrupt schemer, and 11 other families waiting in the dark to see if anybody would ever stand up. And one widow with 2 years of receipts, her husband's true mortgage, and no intention on God's earth of losing quietly. Chase came at sunup, same as she'd ordered, and Abigail met him at the fence with the oilcloth bundle already in her hands. She'd been up since 3 going through it, laying every receipt in order by date, 2 years of them. Each one a night she'd gone without, so the payment could go with. She handed the bundle over to the young lawyer and watched him open it there on the tailgate of his wagon, and she watched his face change as he read. "Ma'am," Chase said slowly, going through the receipts one by one. "Do you understand what you're holding? I understand I paid every month and never missed. You're holding the thing that's going to hang Calvin Mercer." He looked up at her, and there was something like wonder in it. 9 families lost their papers. 3 more won't testify. They're too scared or too broke to risk it, or they've already signed away and left the county. In 18 months of this, you're the first person who kept the original mortgage and every receipt and is willing to walk into a courtroom and say so out loud. He shook his head. "Mr. Whitmore said you'd have kept your papers. I didn't believe him. I said nobody keeps papers that careful." "My husband kept them," Abigail said quietly. It was the last thing he did before he died, put the papers in order, tell me where they were. I think he knew. Not this exactly. But he knew a widow alone would need proof of things, and he made sure I had it. Her throat tightened. I never opened that bundle in 2 years. Couldn't bear to. His handwriting's all over it. She lifted her chin. Turns out he was still protecting this farm from the grave. So let's not waste it. What do we do? What they did was work, and they worked fast because 9 days was nothing, and Mercer's machine was already grinding. Chase filed an emergency petition in the county court that same afternoon. Not a defense against the foreclosure, but an accusation. Fraud. He laid it out plain that the note Mercer held did not match the recorded mortgage, that the payment history proved no default had ever occurred, that the called due clause was a forgery inserted after the fact. And he requested the one thing that could crack the whole scheme open, that the court subpoena the original mortgage from the county recorder's office and compare it in open session against Mercer's note. That was the move that would either save Abigail or doom her, and everyone involved knew it. Because if the county produced an honest original, Mercer was finished. And if the county produced a second forgery, a doctored original, to match Mercer's note, then it would be Abigail's word and Abigail's papers against the full weight of a certified county officer and the county seal, which meant everything came down to Pruitt. Benjamin kept his word. He didn't set foot on her farm. He didn't pay the note. He worked the case from the office over the law firm, and he never once let his name touch a single filing. But he did one thing she didn't know about, and it was the hardest thing, and it was the thing that showed how far he'd come. He found out where Pruitt drank. The deputy recorder was a nervous man. Chase's inquiries had turned up a small man who'd gotten in over his head, who'd taken Mercer's money not out of greed so much as fear, and who'd been drinking heavier and heavier as the scheme spread and his part in it grew. He was a man who knew he'd done wrong and couldn't find the door back out. Benjamin could have used his money on Pruitt. He could have bought the man's testimony, outbid Mercer, purchased the truth the way he'd purchased everything else in his life. It would have worked. It would have been fast. He didn't do it. He'd learned better on that farm, and he wasn't going to unlearn it now. Instead, he sent Chase to sit with Pruitt one evening, not to bribe him, not to threaten him, just to lay out the truth of where things stood. That a widow 20 miles out had kept her papers. That the fraud was going to come apart in open court, whether Pruitt helped or not. That the only choice Pruitt had left was which side of it he wanted to be standing on when it did the man who came forward, or the man who went down with Mercer, swearing lies to the last. Tell him this, Benjamin said to Chase before he went. Tell him nobody's going to buy his testimony. Not us, not Mercer, not anybody, not anymore. Tell him for the first time in a long while the only thing anyone wants from him is the truth for free, and he can give it or not, but it's his to give. Benjamin paused. And tell him a man can walk back out of a wrong thing. It's harder going out than it was coming in. But the door's there. It's always there. He just has to be brave enough to use it. He was talking about Pruitt. He was also, Chase understood, talking about himself. The notice came on the 4th day exactly as Benjamin had warned. A county rider brought it up the lane and put it in Abigail's hand: foreclosure 5 days hence, full payment or forfeit. She read it standing in her yard, and where a week ago it would have buckled her knees, now it just made her jaw set. She rode the notice straight to town and put it in front of Chase. 5 days, she said. 5 days, Chase agreed. The hearing's set for the 4th. That's 1 day before he takes the farm. We get one shot, Mrs. Turner. One hearing, one judge. If we win, the foreclosure's void, and the whole scheme's exposed. If we lose, we won't lose. She said it flat. I've got the truth, and I've got the paper. What's he got? A county seal, and a man willing to lie under it. Chase looked at her carefully. I won't pretend to you, ma'am. Truth doesn't always win a courtroom. Sometimes the seal wins. That's how Mercer's gotten away with it 11 times. Then we'll be the 12th time it didn't. She stood. Who's the judge? Judge Hollis. And that's the one piece of luck we've got. He's old, he's ornery, and he's the one man in this county Mercer couldn't buy. God knows he tried. If we can put the fraud in front of Hollis plain enough that he can't look away from it, we've got a chance." The night before the hearing, Benjamin didn't sleep, and neither did Abigail. And they didn't know they were both awake 40 miles apart thinking the same thing. She sat at her table with the oilcloth bundle and Samuel's mortgage, and she thought about the man who'd brought her the truth. She'd spent 4 days refusing to think kindly of him and losing that fight a little more each day. Because the thing was, he'd done exactly what he said he'd do. He hadn't paid her note. He hadn't shown up at her door. He hadn't tried to buy his way back into her good graces with grand gestures. He'd handed her the weapon and gotten out of the way precisely as he'd promised, and he'd asked for nothing, not even to be there. That was the part that undid her slowly over 4 days. She kept waiting for the catch. The man who lied for 11 days surely had a catch, and there wasn't one. He'd told the truth, done the thing that helped, and vanished wanting no credit. The man who mended your fences was real, he'd said. The money doesn't change that. She was starting against every wall she'd built to believe him, and 40 miles away, Benjamin sat in his rented room and thought about the fact that tomorrow she'd walk into a courtroom alone because she'd forbidden him to come, and he'd honor it and stand up against a corrupt machine that had crushed 11 families before her. And he wouldn't be able to do one single thing to help her in the moment it mattered most. All his money, all his reach, and tomorrow he'd be nothing but a man in a room 40 miles away, waiting to hear whether the woman he loved had won or lost, the only fight that mattered. He'd never felt so powerless. And he understood sitting there that this was what love actually was. Not the power to fix everything, but the willingness to stand back and let someone you love fight their own battle, and trust them to win it, and be there to pick up the pieces either way. "Come on, Abigail," he said to the dark. "Come on, you can do this. You don't need me. You never did." The courtroom was full because word had spread the way word does in country places that the widow Turner was going to stand up to Mercer, and that nobody had ever stood up to Mercer before. Some of the other families came. The old couple from 2 counties over. A few who'd already lost their farms and had nothing left but the wish to see the man who'd taken them get his. They filled the back benches, and they watched a widow in her one good dress walk to the front and sit down beside a young lawyer. And they hoped the way people hope when they've got nothing else. Mercer was there, of course, prosperous and calm with a fine lawyer of his own, a man who'd defended this scheme 11 times and never lost. And Pruitt was there, the deputy recorder, small and gray and sweating with the county's records in a leather case on his lap. Judge Hollis took the bench, old and ornery, exactly as promised, and he looked out over the crowded room with the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else and intended to make everyone pay for dragging him there. "Mr. Chase," he said, "you've made a serious accusation, fraud, against a member of this community and an officer of this county. You'd best have more than a widow's tears, or I'll have you disbarred for wasting my morning." "I have more than tears, Your Honor," Chase said. "I have paper," and he laid it out. He put Abigail on the stand first, and she told it plain, Samuel's mortgage, the payments she'd never missed, the receipts she'd kept the night she'd found that Mercer's note didn't match the real one. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just told the truth in a steady voice, a widow who'd buried her husband and kept her papers, and the room was dead silent listening to her. Then Chase produced the receipts. 2 years of them. He handed them to the judge one by one, dated and stamped every single payment, and Judge Hollis went through them with his reading glasses down on his nose and his face getting grimmer with each one. "According to these," Hollis said slowly, "this woman never missed a payment. Not one in 2 years. No, Your Honor, she never did. And yet Mr. Mercer's note claims she defaulted 3 consecutive times, triggering full payment due." Hollis looked over his glasses at Mercer. "That's a peculiar kind of default, Mr. Mercer. The kind where the payments were all made." Mercer's lawyer stood smoothly. "Your Honor, receipts can be forged. A desperate widow facing foreclosure has every reason to manufacture." "Then let's settle it," Chase said, and here was the moment, the whole case, the knife edge. "Your Honor, I ask the court to do the simplest thing in the world. Send for the original mortgage. The one recorded at the county 8 years ago when Samuel Turner signed it at the bank. It's on file. It's the county's own record. Put it next to Mr. Mercer's note right here in open court, and let us all see with our own eyes whether they match." The room went still, and Judge Hollis turned to the deputy recorder. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, "you've got the county records. Produce the original Turner mortgage. Everything hung on Pruitt now. Everything. Abigail's farm. 11 other families, the whole machine. All of it balanced on one small, sweating man with a leather case on his lap, who could stand up and produce a forgery to match Mercer's swear it was the true original and doom her with the county seal behind him." Chase had done everything right. Abigail had told the truth, and none of it would matter if Pruitt lied one more time. Pruitt didn't move. "Mr. Pruitt," Hollis said again, sharper, "the court is waiting. Produce the original mortgage." And Abigail, watching, saw the small man's hands shaking on the case. She saw him look at Mercer, and she saw Mercer give the smallest nod. "Do it. Produce the fake, same as always." And she felt her heart drop, because she understood in that instant that this was where the 11 families had lost. Right here. At exactly this moment, when the county man reached into his case and pulled out a lie with a seal on it. Pruitt opened the case. His hands were shaking so hard the papers rattled. And then Abigail would remember this the rest of her life. The small gray man looked up not at Mercer, but at her. At the widow in her one good dress. And something moved across his face, some last flicker of the person he'd been before he got in over his head, and Benjamin's message must have reached down into him somewhere. The words, "Chase had carried a man," can walk back out of a wrong thing. The door's always there because Pruitt drew a long, shaking breath and did the bravest thing he'd done in years. He pulled out 2 documents. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice cracked. "I have the original Turner mortgage here, the true one." His hands shook. "And I have to tell the court. I have to say it. Mr. Mercer's note doesn't match it. It never did. I know it doesn't match it because—" He stopped. He closed his eyes. "Because I'm the one who certified the forgery. God forgive me. I certified all of them. Mercer paid me and I was afraid and I did it and I can't do it anymore. Here." He held out both papers and they trembled in the air. "Here's the truth. Compare them yourselves. And then Lord help me do what you have to do to me, because I've got it coming." The courtroom erupted. Mercer was on his feet. His lawyer shouting. Hollis banging for order, and through all of it Abigail sat perfectly still. Her hands folded, tears running silent down her face, because she'd won. They'd won. The machine had broken right there in front of everyone. It had crushed. Judge Hollis took the 2 documents. He laid them side by side on the bench. He read them slow in a courtroom gone silent again, waiting on him. And when he looked up, his ornery old face was hard as a hanging judge's. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "these do not match. This original mortgage is for a lesser sum, contains no call due clause, and specifies that default requires 3 consecutive missed payments. Payments which the receipts before me prove were never missed. Your note is a forgery, and it appears from Mr. Pruitt's testimony that it is one of many." He set the papers down. "This foreclosure is void, and you, sir, are going to answer for every farm you've touched." Bailiff. They took Mercer out in irons. The man who'd crushed 11 families and thought he'd crush a 12th led out of the courtroom past the very people he'd ruined, and the old couple from 2 counties over held on to each other and wept because their case would be reopened now too. All of them with the whole rotten machine unmade, because one widow kept her papers and one frightened man finally found the door back out. She didn't go home right away. Chase had ridden ahead to carry the news, and by the time Abigail came up her own lane in the late afternoon, still in her one good dress, still shaking from it, she found a message waiting for her left with the neighbor's boy who'd been watching the place. Just a folded piece of paper in a hand she was coming to know. "You did it. Not me, you. I never doubted it for a second. The farm is yours, free and clear exactly the way it should be. Nobody's gift, nobody's charity, just yours, the way you earned it. I'm glad beyond words. I won't come to you. I meant what I said. I hand you the tools, and I get out of your way. And this is me getting out of your way. You never have to see me again if that's your wish, and I'll understand it. And I'll always be glad I got to know the woman who wouldn't lose quietly. B. There was no come find me, no forgive me, no claim on her at all, just gladness given freely, and then a door held open for her to walk through, or not as she chose. Abigail read it, standing in her yard on her land free and clear, saved by her own hand, and she thought about all of it. The 11 days he'd worked beside her, the lie, the carriage, the way he'd walked away when she told him to without a word in his own defense. The truth he'd carried back to her fence when he could have used it to buy his way into her good graces and hadn't. The lawyer he'd paid for and never mentioned. The battle he'd let her fight alone because he understood somehow that she needed to win it herself. And now, this the farm saved and him stepping back wanting no credit, asking for nothing, glad just to have known her. She thought about a man in a torn coat asking why she was good to him. She thought about how she'd nearly answered that question wrong. How she'd nearly let the men who came in the night win after all, nearly let them turn her into a woman who slams the door. She stood in her yard a long time as the light went long across her wheat. Then she went inside, and she went to the trunk, and she took out the mended coat she hadn't been able to burn, and she held it in her 2 hands, and she understood at last what she'd known in the bottom of her heart, since the day the carriage came, and she hadn't let herself say. The man who'd worn this coat was real. The money had never changed that. It never had. And she was done losing quietly. Done losing anything quietly. Including this. She wrote him a letter that night and tore it up. She wrote another and tore that up too. There was too much to say, and no way to say it, and every version came out either too proud or not proud enough, and finally near midnight, she gave up on words entirely and wrote just 1 line and sealed it before she could lose her nerve. She gave it to the neighbor's boy at first light, with instructions to carry it to town to the office over the law firm, to the man he'd find there. The line said, "Come to the farm Sunday. Wear the coat." Nothing else. No forgiveness in it, no promise, no explanation. She figured that was fair. He'd made her wait 11 days to learn who he was. He could wait a few days to learn what she'd decided. 40 miles away, Benjamin read those 7 words a dozen times, and then a dozen more, and he could not for the life of him decide what they meant. Wear the coat. Which coat? He had 100 coats, but he knew which coat. There was only one coat that mattered between them, and it was the torn work coat she'd mended by lamplight, and he'd kept it. Of course he'd kept it. He'd carried it out of that hayloft when he left, and he'd never let it go. It hung in his hotel room, like the last true thing he owned, but he couldn't read her meaning. Was it a rebuke? Come as the poor man you pretended to be, so I can throw it in your face one more time. Was it a test? Or was it? He didn't dare think it was something else. What does it mean? He asked. Harmon showing him the line for the 5th time. The old man read it, and read it again, and a slow smile spread over his careful face. It means, Harmon said, that you should wear the coat. That's not an answer. It's the only answer there is, and she gave it to you plain. Harmon folded the paper back into Benjamin's hand. She's not asking for the rich man Benjamin. She had her chance at the rich man, and she threw him off her porch. She's asking for the other one, the one she mended. Go find out which man you are. But I think you already know, and I think she knows too, and I think that's the whole point of the coat. So, Sunday came slow. Benjamin left the mansion behind. He left the fine carriage behind too, or nearly. He had it drive him to within a mile of her lane, and then he sent it back because he'd be damned if he'd roll up her road on Fine Springs one more time. He walked the last mile same as the first day on his own 2 feet. In the torn work coat she'd mended, the patched sleeve still holding where her small, even stitches had closed it. And here was the thing he'd wrestled with the whole walk up, the thing that finally made him understand what he'd done wrong and what he had to do right. He'd come to her the first time in a disguise hiding the fortune. He'd nearly come to her the last time as the fortune all carriage and name and money. And both were wrong. Both were a kind of lie. The truth, the only truth that could stand between them now, was that he was both men and neither. He was a rich man who could work a field. He was a farmhand who happened to own a fortune. He'd spent his whole life letting the money decide which man he was, and out here on this lane in this coat, he finally understood that he was the one who got to decide. Not the money. Him. He came up over the rise, and there was the farmhouse, and there was Abigail standing in the yard in the same plain dress she'd worn the day he first walked up, and she watched him come the whole way, and neither of them said a word until he stopped a few feet from her, close enough to see that her hands were trembling, and she was letting them. He took off his hat. Same as the first day. Same as always. "You told me to wear the coat," he said. "I did." "I wasn't sure which man you wanted." "Neither was I." She looked at the coat, the patched sleeve, her own stitches. Then she looked at his face. "That's what I had to figure out. Which man I wanted. Took me a while." "Abigail, let me say it." She held up a hand, and he went quiet, because she'd earned the right to say whatever she'd come to say, and he'd wait a lifetime to hear it. "I spent a long time being angry at you, and I was right to be. Don't think I've changed my mind about the lie. You lied to me for 11 days, and that was a real thing, and it hurt me in a real place, and no amount of everything after makes that not true." She drew a breath. "But I've had time to think about what I was really angry at, and it wasn't the money, and it wasn't even the lie not underneath." Her voice wavered. "I was angry because for 11 days I let myself feel something I swore I'd never feel again. I let myself care about a man, and then I found out the man wasn't who I thought, and I decided that meant the caring was a lie too. I decided the whole thing was false because the name was false." She shook her head slowly. "But it wasn't false. That's what I couldn't get past. Because you kept proving it. Every single thing you did after the carriage, you did it right. You brought me the truth about the note when you could have used it to buy me. You paid for the lawyer and never said a word. You let me fight my own fight when a smaller man would have charged in to be the hero. You saved my farm and 11 other families, and you signed your name to none of it." Her eyes were wet now, and she let them be. "A liar doesn't do that, Benjamin. A man who was only after something doesn't do that. So I had to ask myself, what if the man at my table was the real one all along? What if the only thing false about him was his name? He was real," Benjamin said, and his own voice broke. "Abigail, I swear to you on everything I've got and everything I am, every word at that table was real. The name was the only lie. Everything else was the truest I've ever been in my life." "I know." She said it simply. "That's why you're standing here." He couldn't speak. "I mended that coat because you were a man I was starting to care for," she said, "and I couldn't burn it after because you still were, no matter what your name turned out to be. I tried to throw you out with the trash, Benjamin Whitmore. Same as I tried to burn the coat. And I couldn't do either one because I don't throw out things I care about. My mother taught me that. You take better care of what you can't just replace." And Benjamin Whitmore, richest man in 3 counties, went down on one knee in the dirt of a wheat farm in a torn coat, mended by the hands of the woman in front of him. He didn't have jewels. He'd left them behind on purpose. He didn't have contracts or deeds or any of the paper his whole life had been built on. He reached into the pocket of the mended coat and took out one thing, a plain gold ring, no stone, the kind a farmhand might save 2 years to buy, and he held it up to her. "I came to you the first time hiding who I was," he said, "because I was afraid nobody could love the man once they saw the fortune, and I was a coward for it, and it cost me you, and I've spent every day since learning what it cost." His hand was steady now, though his voice wasn't. "So today, I'm not hiding anything. You know exactly who I am. You know the worst thing I ever did, you're the one I did it to. There's not one thing left to discover, not one secret, not one lie. This is all of me kneeling in your dirt in the coat you mended with nothing hidden and nothing to offer but the man." He took a breath. "The carriage belongs to the fortune, but the man in front of you is still just the one who repaired your fences. Will you marry him? Not the money, not the name. Just the man before you ever accept a dollar of the rest. For one long, unbearable moment, she didn't answer. And then Abigail Turner walked the last 2 steps between them, and she took his weathered hands in both of hers. And she pulled him up off his knee to stand level with her, because she'd be damned if she'd have any man kneeling to her, rich or poor. That was never what she'd wanted. I chose the man, she said, long before I ever knew his name. And she kissed him there in the yard, in the wheat gold light, and the ring went on to her finger, and 2 years of held-together grief, and 11 days of lies, and a whole lifetime of being wanted for the wrong reasons, dissolved into the one right thing at last. They married in the small country church where Benjamin had first sat in a back pew as an unknown laborer in the days before anyone knew his name. The same church. He'd insisted on it, and she'd loved him for insisting. Half the county came. The families whose farms had been saved when Mercer's machine came down, they filled the pews, the old couple from 2 counties over sitting up front like family, because in a way they'd become it. Pruitt wasn't there. He was serving his time, a lighter sentence for turning state's evidence, and Benjamin had quietly paid for the man's family to keep their home while he did, because a man who finds the door back out of a wrong thing ought to have something to walk home to. Abigail had let him do that one. Some kindnesses she'd decided a person was allowed to give. She wore no fine gown. She wore her mother's dress made over, and Benjamin stood at the front in a good suit, but under it folded in a chest at home, the mended work coat still hung, and it would hang there the rest of their lives, because some things you keep. After the wedding, everyone expected the grand estate. Everyone expected the widow Turner to become the mistress of the Whitmore mansion and leave the dying little wheat farm behind. She didn't. She kept the farm. "It's where I found you," she told Benjamin, "and it's where you found yourself. The mansion's just a house. This is home." So they lived on the farm, mostly the mansion standing quiet and mostly empty, opened only when business demanded it. And they did the thing that surprised the whole county and shouldn't have surprised anyone who understood them. They didn't buy up struggling farms. They saved them. When a family fell behind, when a widow or an old couple or a young pair just starting out found themselves one bad harvest from losing everything, Benjamin and Abigail were there, not to take the land, not to own it, not to demand gratitude, but to steady it and hand it back, the way Benjamin had once handed Abigail the truth and stepped out of the way. They restored 12 farms across 3 counties in the first year alone, and they never took a single deed, and they never once let their names be spoken as the reason. "Why do you do it that way?" a young farmer asked Benjamin once, a man they'd quietly pulled back from the edge. "Why help and take no credit? You could own half this valley by now." Benjamin looked out over the wheat. Abigail's wheat, their wheat. And he thought about a woman who'd mended a coat instead of throwing it out, who'd fed a stranger at her table when she had barely enough, who'd defended a poor man's dignity to his face when she thought there was nothing in it for her at all. "Because somebody was good to me once," he said, for no reason but that it was in her to be good, and it gave me back my life. I spent 40 years thinking a man was worth what he owned. Took a woman with nothing to teach me a man's worth what he gives away. He smiled. The credit was never the point. The giving was. Years later, when they were old, when the wheat had come and gone across the fields more times than either of them could count, a granddaughter asked Abigail how she'd known. How she'd known the rich man was worth trusting after he'd lied to her after everything. And Abigail Turner, who was Abigail Whitmore now, and had been for longer than she'd ever been. Anything else took the girl's hand and thought about how to say it true. "He came to me the first time with a fortune he was hiding," she said, "and I couldn't love him because I didn't know him. And he came to me the last time with a fortune he wasn't hiding, and I still couldn't love that. What I loved, what I married, was the man in between, the one in the torn coat who worked beside me instead of above me, who told me the truth, even when the truth cost him everything, who saved what mattered and asked for nothing back." She squeezed the girl's hand. "The money built a lot of things over the years, child. Houses and roads and second chances for 100 families. but it never built one single thing that mattered between him and me. Not one. Everything that mattered we built with our own 2 hands at a kitchen table over honest work. She looked out the window to where an old man in a familiar patched coat was mending a fence he didn't need to mend because he liked the doing of it, and always had. "A fortune can build you a house," Abigail said, "but it takes trust to build a home. And your grandfather and I built ours out of the only things that ever last: honesty and shared work and the simple stubborn choice to value a person more than anything you could buy. That's the whole secret. That's all there ever was to it." And it was true, every word, and it stayed true for the rest of their long lives together, and it was the truest thing either of them had ever known.